Welcome back. Good morning. This fine, beautiful, gorgeous morning. I wanted to go back and find this sentence because I thought it was so funny from chapter 11 of Sense and Sensibility. When Eleanor was in the jewelry shop, I mean, Marianne was there too, but Marianne said nothing. I mean, just coming out of a grief stupor and taking her into the absolutely busiest store in town. I wouldn't be able to say much either. But they were in this jewelry store, and Eleanor, there was a man in front of her. She was waiting patiently, and this sentence says, this man was deciding on a toothpick box in this jewelry store, and it said, "At last the affair was decided. The ivory, the gold, and the pearls all received their appointment, and the gentleman, having named the last day on which his existence could be continued without the possession of the toothpick case." The last day on which his existence could be continued without the possession of the toothpick case. Drew on his gloves with leisurely care, and bestowing another glance to Miss Dashwood, but such a one as seemed happier to demand than express admiration, walked off with a happy air of real conceit and affectionate and affected indifference. He couldn't go on one day in this existence without this toothpick case, and I just thought that was so funny. I just wanted to go back and read that. We're reading Sense and Sensibility. We're on chapter 13 of the second volume of this book. And Marianne just sort of had a little outburst defending Eleanor, which was very sweet. But Colonel Brandon came over and sort of wanted to give a little comforting to Marianne. Because Mrs. Ferrars was being a jerk. Mrs. Ferrars and Fanny, all these Dashwoods and the Ferrars, no thanks, were being jerks to Eleanor. And Marianne stood up for her and then started crying. And it was really sweet. So chapter 13, after this huge meeting where I think Eleanor really thought she was going to see Edward, but then he didn't show up, and here we are, on we go. Eleanor's curiosity to see Mrs. Ferrars was satisfied. Check that off the list of things to do in my life. She had found in her everything that could tend to make a farther connection between the families undesirable. Yeah. She had seen enough of her pride, her meanness, and her determined prejudice against herself to comprehend all the difficulties that must have perplexed the engagement and retarded the marriage of Edward and herself, and had he been otherwise free. Pride and prejudice in the same sentence, and then she wrote Pride and Prejudice. I wonder if she was working on these books at the same time. That's so interesting. But wasn't Pride and Prejudice, what was it going to be called? It was going to be called something else. I saw in one thing, Pride and Prejudice was supposed to be called, not Lady Susan, but it was supposed to be called Eleanor Marianne's First Impressions. That's right, it was supposed to be called First Impressions. But then it was called Pride and Prejudice. Interesting. From this book. Enough of her pride, her meanness, and her determined prejudice against it, comprehend all the difficulties that might perplex the engagement and retarded the marriage of Edward and herself, had he been otherwise free. I don't know why that just happened. That was creepy. And she had seen almost enough to be thankful for her own sake that one greater obstacle preserved her from suffering under any other of Mrs. Ferrars's creation, preserved her from all dependence upon her caprice, and any solicitude for her good opinion. Or at least, if she did not bring herself quite to rejoice in Edward's being fettered to Lucy, she determined that had Lucy been more amiable, she ought to have rejoiced. Huge opening paragraph of this chapter, my gosh. She wondered that Lucy's spirits could be so very much elevated by the civility of Mrs. Ferrars, that her interest in her vanity should so very much blind her as to make the attention which seemed only paid her because she was not Eleanor appeared a compliment to herself, or to allow her to derive encouragement from a preference only given her because her real situation was unknown. But that it was so had not only been declared by Lucy's eyes at the time, but was declared over again the next morning more openly, for at her particular desire Lady Middleton set her down in Berkeley Street on the chance of seeing Eleanor alone, and to tell her how happy she was. Really? You're so happy that you're going to be a part of that disgusting Pride and Prejudice family? Really? The chance proved a lucky one, for a message from Mrs. Palmer soon after arrived, carried Mrs. Jennings away. Oh. Message from Mrs. Palmer soon after she arrived carried Mrs. Jennings away. My dear friend, cried Lucy, as soon as they were by themselves, I come to talk to you of my happiness. Could anything be so flattering as Mrs. Farrar's way of treating me yesterday? So exceedingly affable as she was. You know how I dreaded the thoughts of seeing her, but the very moment I was introduced, there was such an affability on her behaviour as really should seem to say she had quite took a fancy to me. Now was not it so? You saw it all, and was not you quick struck with it? Was not you quite struck with it? She was certainly very civil to you. Civil? Did you see nothing but only civility? I saw a vast deal more. Such kindness as fell to share of nobody me? What? Such kindness as fell to the share of nobody but me? No pride, no hauteur, and your sister just the same, all sweetness and affability. Eleanor wished to talk of something else, but Lucy still pressed her to own that she had reason for her happiness, and Eleanor was obliged to go on. Undoubtedly, if they had known your engagement, said she, nothing could be more flattering than their treatment of you. But as that was not the case. I guessed you would say so, replied Lucy quickly, but there was no reason in the world why Mrs. Farrar should seem to like me if she did not, and her liking me is everything. You shan't talk me out of my satisfaction. I am assured it will all end well, and there will be no difficulties at all, to what I used to think. Mrs. Farrar is a charming woman, and so is your sister. They are both delightful women indeed. I wonder I should never hear you say how agreeable Mrs. Dashwood was. To this Eleanor had no answer to make, and did not attempt any. Are you ill, Miss Dashwood? You seem low. You don't speak. Surely you ain't well. I never was in better health. I am glad of it with all my heart, but really you do not look it. I should be very sorry to have you ill, you that have been the greatest comfort to me in the world. Heavens knows what I should have done without your friendship. Eleanor tried to make a civil answer, though doubting her own success, but it seemed to satisfy Lucy, for she directly replied, Indeed, I am perfectly convinced of your regard for me, and next to Edward's love, it is the greatest comfort I have. Poor Edward! But now there is one good thing, we shall be able to meet, and meet pretty often, for Lady Middleton's delighted with Mrs. Dashwood, so we shall be a great deal in Harley Street, I dare say, and Edward spends half his time with his sister. Besides, Lady Middleton and Mrs. Ferrars will visit now, and Mrs. Ferrars and your sister were both so good, to say more than once. They should always be glad to see me. They are such charming women. I am sure if you ever tell your sister what I think of her, you cannot speak too high. But Eleanor would not give her any encouragement to hope that she should tell her sister. Lucy continued. I am sure I should have seen it in a moment, if Mrs. Ferrars had took a dislike to me. If she had only made me a formal curtsy, for instance, without saying a word, and never after had took any notice of me, and never looked at me in a pleasant way. You know what I mean. If I had been treated in that forbidding sort of way, I should have gave it all up in despair. I could not have stood it. For where she does dislike, I know it is most violent. Elinor was prevented from making any reply to this civil triumph by the doors being thrown open, the servants announcing Mr. Ferrars and Edwards immediately walking in. Lucy and Elinor are sitting there talking about how amazing Mrs. Ferrars is. And Edward Ferrars just walked in. Fast. He walked in quickly. Like the servant was like, he's here, and then he was there. Oh my God, it says right here. It was a very awkward moment. And the countenance of each showed that it was so. They all looked exceedingly foolish. Oh, and Edward seemed to have as great an inclination to walk out of the room again as to advance farther into it. He said, oh, I should go. This is awkward. Oh my gosh. Jane Austen really has a really good way of making things really cringy. Like Mr. Collins's proposal to Elizabeth Bennet was so cringy. The wording was so cringy. And this very, very awkward moment is equally as cringy. We'll see what happens. Okay. The very circumstance in its unpleasantest form, which they would each have been most anxious to avoid, had fallen on them. They were not only all three together, but were together without the relief of any other person. Right. The ladies recovered themselves first. It was not Lucy's business to put herself forward, and the appearance of secrecy must still be kept up. She could therefore only look her tenderness, and after slightly addressing him, said no more. They're at Eleanor's house, right? They're like at the Dashwoods, Mrs. Jennings' house. Oh my God. And he's like coming to see Eleanor clearly. But Eleanor had more to do, and so anxious was she, for his sake and for her own, to do it well, that she forced herself, after a moment's recollection, to welcome him with a look and a manner that were almost easy and almost open, and another struggle, another effort still improved them. She would not allow the presence of Lucy, nor the consciousness of some injustice toward herself, to deter her from saying that she was happy to see him, and that she had very much regretted being from home when he called before in Berkeley Street. She would not be frightened from paying him those attentions which, as a friend and almost a relation, were his due, by the observant eyes of Lucy, though she soon perceived them to be narrowly watching her. Her manners gave some reassurance to Edward, and he had courage enough to sit down. But his embarrassment still exceeded that of the ladies in a proportion which the case rendered reasonable, though his sex might make it rare, for his heart had not the indifference of Lucy's, nor could his conscience have quite the ease of Eleanor's. Lucy, with a demure and settled Ed, seemed determined to make no contribution to the comfort of others, and would not say a word, and almost everything that was said proceeded from Eleanor, who was obliged to volunteer all the information about her mother's health, their coming to town, etc. Okay, it says and see, but I think it meant to be etc. I just automatically said etc., but it says and see right there, which is so interesting. I wonder if that's what that means. Which Edward ought to have inquired about, but never did. Oh, she's just mouth vomiting, like, words that he's like, I didn't even ask about that, but thank you for, like, breaking the ice. Oh. Her exertions did not stop here, for soon afterwards she felt herself so heroically disposed as to determine, under pretence of fetching Marianne, to leave the others by themselves, and she really did it, and that in the handsomest manner, for she loitered away several minutes on the landing-place in the most high-minded fortitude before she went to her sister. She had to gather her fortress. She had to gather herself. When that was once done, however, it was time for the raptures of Edward to cease, for Marianne's joy hurried her into the drawing room immediately. Her pleasure in seeing him was like every other of her feelings, strong in itself and strongly spoken. She met him with a hand that would be taken. She met him with a hand that would be taken, and a voice that expressed the affection of a sister. "Dear Edward," she cried, "this is a moment of great happiness. This would almost make amends for everything." Oh. Edward tried to return her kindness as it deserved, but before such witness he dared not say half what he really felt. Again they all sat down, and for a moment or two all was silent, while Marianne was looking with the most speaking tenderness, sometimes at Edward and sometimes at Eleanor, regretted only that their delight in each other should be checked by Lucy's unwelcome presence. Edward was the first to speak, and it was to notice Marianne's altered looks and express his fear of her finding London, his fear of her not finding London agree with her. "Oh, don't think of me," she replied with spirited earnestness, though her eyes were filled with tears as she spoke. "Don't think of my health. Eleanor is well, you see. That must be enough for us both." This remark was not calculated to make Edward or Eleanor more easy, nor to conciliate the goodwill of Lucy, who looked up at Marianne with no very benignant expression. Benign, but benignant. "Do you like London?" said Edward, willing to say anything that might introduce another subject. "Not at all. I expect much pleasure in it, but I've found none. The sight of you, Edward, is the only comfort it has afforded, and thank heaven you are what you always were." She paused. No one spoke. "I think, Eleanor," she presently added, "we must employ Edward to take care of us in our return to Barton. In a week or two, I suppose, we shall be going, and I trust Edward will not be very unwilling to accept the charge." Poor Edward muttered something, but this is the problem, because the sisters don't talk to each other. It's like Marianne doesn't want to hear Eleanor's, like, stoic whatever, and Eleanor doesn't want to hear Marianne's absolutely overly, not naive, but there's just so much feeling in what Marianne says, and being a sister to that would be, gosh. Okay, sorry. I just needed a break, because this is just so awkward. Poor Edward muttered something, but it was nobody knew, not even himself. But what it was, nobody knew. But Marianne, who saw his agitation and could easily trace it to whatever cause best pleased herself, was perfectly satisfied, and soon talked of something else. "We spent such a day, Edward, in Harley Street yesterday. So dull, so wretchedly dull, but I have much to say to you on that head, which cannot be said now." And with this admirable discretion did she defer the assurance of her finding their mutual relatives more disagreeable than ever, and of her being particularly disgusted with his mother till they were more in private. "But why were you not there, Edward? Why did you not come?" "I was engaged elsewhere." "Engaged? But what was that, when such friends were to be met?" "Perhaps Miss Marianne," said Lucy, eager to take some revenge on her. "You think young men never stand upon engagements, if they have no mind to keep them, little as well as great." Eleanor was very angry, but Marianne seemed entirely insensible of the sting, for she calmly replied, "If they have no mind to keep them, little is great as well as great." "Not so indeed, for seriously speaking, I am very sure that conscience only kept Edward from Harley Street, and I really believe that he has the most delicate conscience in the world, the most scrupulous in performing every engagement, however minute, and however it may make against his interest or pleasure. He is the most fearful of giving pain, of wounding expectation, and the most incapable of being selfish of anybody I ever saw. Edward, it is so, and I will say it. What? Are you never to hear yourself praised? Then you must be no friend of mine, for those who will accept my love and esteem must submit to my open commendation." The nature of her accommodation in present case, however, happened to be particularly ill-suited to the feelings of 2/3 of her auditors, and was so very unexhilarating to Edward that he very soon got up to go away. "Coming so soon," said Marianne. "My dear Edward, this must not be." And drawing him a little aside, she whispered her persuasion that Lucy could not stay much longer. But even this encouragement failed, for he would go, and Lucy, who would have outstayed him had his visit lasted 2 hours, soon afterwards went away. "What can bring her here so often?" said Marianne on her leaving them. "She could not see that we wanted her gone. How teasing to Edward." "Why so? We were all his friends, and Lucy has been the longest known to him of any. It is but natural that he should like to see her as well as ourselves." Marianne, who looked at her steadily, and said, "You know, Eleanor, that this is a kind of talking which I cannot bear. If you only hope to have your assertion contradicted, as I must suppose to be the case, you ought to recollect that I am the last person in the world to do it. I cannot descend to be tricked out of assurances that are not really wanted." She then left the room, and Eleanor dared not follow her to say more, for bound she was by her promise of secrecy to Lucy. Oh, that's right. Okay, so they didn't talk about because of her secrecy to Lucy. Yeah, imagine if Marianne had known. That whole thing would have probably been even more awkward, because Marianne would have been like, "Oh my God." She probably might have tried to get Lucy out of there, actually. Whatever. Her promise of secrecy to Lucy. She could give no more information that would convince Marianne, and painful as the consequences of her still continuing in an error might be, she was obliged to submit to it. All that she could hope was that Edward would not often expose her or himself to the distress of hearing Marianne's mistaken warmth, nor to the repetition of any other part of the pain that had attended their recent meeting, and this she had every reason to expect. Let's do another chapter, chapter 14. Within a few days after this meeting, the newspapers announced to the world that the lady of Thomas Palmer, Esquire, was safely delivered of a son and heir. A very interesting and satisfactory paragraph, at least to all those intimate connections who knew it before. This event, so Lady Palmer was pregnant. Did I know that? I don't remember. Safety delivered of a son and heir. Wow, they put like births in the newspaper. The kid didn't die, and the mom didn't die either, and it's newsworthy in the Regency era that nobody died during childbirth. This event, highly important to Mrs. Jennings' happiness, produced a temporary alteration in the disposal of her time, and influenced in a like degree the engagements of her young friends. For as she wished to be as much as possible with Charlotte, she went thither every morning as soon as she was dressed, and did not return till late in the evening. And the Miss Dashwoods, at the particular request of the Middletons, spent the whole of every day in Conduit Street. For their own comfort, they would much rather have remained, at least all the morning, in Mrs. Jennings' house, alone. But it was not a thing to be urged against the wishes of everybody. The hours were therefore made over to Lady Middleton and the 2 Miss Steeles, by whom their company was in fact as little valued as it was professedly sought. They had too much sense to be desirable companions to the former, and by the latter they were considered with a jealous eye as intruding on their ground, and sharing the kindness which they wanted to monopolize. Though nothing could be more polite than Lady Middleton's behaviour to Eleanor and Marianne, she did not really like them at all. She did not really like them at all, because they neither flattered herself nor her children. She could not believe them good-natured, and because they were not fond of reading, she fancied them satirical. Perhaps without exactly knowing what it was to be satirical, but that did not signify. It was censure in common use and easily given. Yikes. Their present was a restraint both on her and on Lucy. It checked the idleness of one and the busyness of the other. Lady Middleton was ashamed of doing nothing before them, and the flattery which Lucy was proud to think of and administer at other times, she feared they would despise her for offering. Miss Steele was the least discomposed of the three by their presence, and it was in their power to reconcile her to it entirely. Would either of them only have given her a full and minute account of the whole affair between Marianne and Mr. Willoughby, she would have thought herself amply rewarded for the sacrifice of the best place by the fire after dinner, which their arrival occasioned. But this conciliation was not granted, for though she often threw out expressions of pity for her sister to Eleanor, and more than once dropped a reflection on the inconsistency of both before Marianne, no effect was produced, but a look of indifference from the former, or of disgust in the latter. An effort even yet lighter might have made her their friend. Would they only have laughed at her about the Dr. Davies? But so little were they, any more than others, inclined to oblige her, that if Sir John dined from home, she might spend the whole day without hearing any other raillery on the subject than what she was kind enough to bestow on herself. All these jealousies and discontents, however, were so totally unsuspected by Mrs. Jennings that she thought it a delightful thing for the girls to be together, and generally congratulated her young friends every night on having escaped the company of stupid old women so long. Wow, they all really just don't like each other, and they're forced to spend all day together and Mrs. Jennings is like, you got rid of me, good for you. Yikes, this is tense. When people are forced to spend too much time together and their politeness just sort of disintegrates, and you're like, we're going to spend every day together. We actually really don't even like each other. And we can only be polite so much. We can only have so much politeness for these people we don't even like. But we have to be polite because that's society. She joined them sometimes at Sir John's and sometimes at her own house. But wherever it was, she always came in excellent spirits, full of delight and importance, attributing Charlotte's well-doing to her own care, and ready to give so exact, so minute a detail of a situation as only Miss Steele had curiosity enough to desire. One thing did disturb her, and of that she made her daily complaint. Mr. Palmer maintained the common but unfatherly opinion among his sex of all infants being alike, and though she could plainly perceive at different times the most striking resemblance between this baby and every one of his relations on both sides, there was no convincing his father of it. No persuading him to believe that it was not exactly like every other baby of the same age. Not could he even be brought to acknowledge the simple proposition of its being the finest child in the world. She's like, this is the most beautiful baby, and Mr. Palmer's like, it looks like every other baby. And she's like, this is the finest child in all the world. And he's like, it's exactly like every other child in all the world. He's so dull and boring and so funny. This is so fun. This is the second time she said that, who is I? She's never said I. This happened in Pride and Prejudice also. Who is I? I come now to the relation of a misfortune, which about this time befell Mrs. John Dashwood. Who is I? She hasn't said I this whole book. This is so fascinating. I come now to the relation of a misfortune, which about this time befell Mrs. John Dashwood. It so happened that while her two sisters with Mrs. Jennings were first calling on her in Harley Street, another of her acquaintance had dropped in, a circumstance in itself not apparently like to produce evil to her. But while the imaginations of other people will carry them away to form wrong judgments of our conduct and to decide it by slight appearances, one's happiness must in some measure be always at the mercy of chance. In the present instance, this last arrived lady allowed her fancy so far to outrun truth and probability that on merely hearing the name of the Miss Dashwoods, and understanding them to be Mr. Dashwood's sisters, she immediately concluded them to be staying in Harley Street, and this misconstruction produced within a day or two afterwards cards of invitation for them as well as for their brother and sister to a small musical party at her house, the consequence of which was that Mrs. John Dashwood was obliged to submit not only to the exceedingly great inconvenience of sending a carriage for the Miss Dashwoods, but what was still worse, must be subject to all the unpleasantness of appearing to treat them with attention. And who could tell that they might not expect to go out with her a second time? The misfortune that befell Mrs. John Dashwood was that she actually had to pay attention to her sister-in-laws and actually appear to be taking care of them by sending them a carriage. Is that what this is saying? Is that what this book right here is saying? Fanny Bobanny. Fanny Bobanny. I can't even take it. The power of disappointing them, it was true, must always be hers. Fanny! The power of disappointing them, it was true, must always be hers. But that was not enough. For when people are determined on a mode of conduct which they know to be wrong, they feel injured by the expectation of anything better from them. Marianne had now been brought by degrees so much into the habit of going out every day that it was become a matter of indifference to her whether she went or not. And she prepared quietly and mechanically for every evening's engagement, though without expecting the smallest amusement from any, and very often without knowing till the last moment where it was to take her. To her dress and appearance she was grown so perfectly indifferent as not to bestow half the consideration on it during the whole of her toilet, which it received from Miss Steele in the first 5 minutes of their being together, when it was finished. Nothing escaped her minute observation and general curiosity. She saw everything and asked everything, was never easy till she knew the price of every part of Marianne's dress, could not have guessed the number of her gowns altogether, with better judgment than Marianne herself, and was not without hopes of finding out before they parted how much her washing cost per week, and how much she had every year to spend on herself. The impertinence of these kind of scrutinies, moreover, was generally concluded with a compliment, which, though meant as its doucer, was considered by Marianne as the greatest impertinence of all. For after undergoing an examination into the value and make of her gown, the colour of her shoes, and the arrangement of her hair, she was almost sure of being told that upon her word she looked vastly smart, and she dared to say what would make a great many conquests. She dared to say would make a great many conquests. With such encouragement as this was she dismissed on present occasion to her brother's carriage, which they were ready to enter 5 minutes after it stopped at the door, and punctuality not very agreeable to their sister-in-law, who had preceded them to the house of her acquaintance, and was there hoping for some delay on their part that might inconvenience either herself or her coachman. The events of the evening were not very remarkable. The party, like other musical parties, comprehended a great many people who had real taste for the performance, and a many great more who had none at all, and the performers themselves were, as usual, in their own estimation, and that of their immediate friends, the first private performers in England. Whoa. The performers themselves were the first private performers in England. As Eleanor was neither musical nor affecting to be so, she made no scruple of turning away her eyes from the grand pianoforte whenever it suited her, and unrestrained even by the presence of a harp and a violoncello. That word really messed with my brain. Violoncello would fix them at pleasure on any other object in the room. In one of these excursive glances, she perceived among a group of young men the very he who had given them a lecture on toothpick cases at Gray's. The toothpick case man is back? Whoa, I was like, okay, we're going a lot into this toothpick guy. He's back. She perceived him soon afterwards looking at herself and speaking familiarly to her brother, and had just determined to find out his name from the latter, when they both came towards her, and Mr. Dashwood introduced him to her as Mr. Robert Ferrars. Oh, it's Edward's brother, Robert Ferrars. Okay. Robert Ferrars absolutely could not exist without this toothpick case. I can't believe it. I can't believe this. Okay. He addressed her with easy civility and twisted his head into a bow, which assured her as plainly as words could have done that he was exactly the coxcomb she had heard him described to be by Lucy. Happy had it been for her if her regard for Edward had depended less on his own merit than on the merit of his nearest relations. For then his brother's bow. Did I say bow? Wait. I said bow like a bow tie, but it was a bow like a bow. Where did I just... Okay, his head into a bow. Okay, let me start over. He addressed her with easy civility and twisted his head into a bow, not a bow. Like a bow tie. Okay, a bow. Which assured her as plainly as words could have done that he was exactly the coxcomb she had heard him described to be by Lucy. Happy had it been for her if her regard for Edward had depended less on his own merit than on the merit of his nearest relation. Let me just remind myself what a coxcomb is, because I forgot, and I can't believe it, but we thought it had something to do with a rooster's head. Coxcomb... Vain and conceited. Oh, a dandy, that's right. A dandy. That's right. Coxcomb. That's right. For then his brother's bow must have given the finishing strokes to what the ill humour of his mother and sister would have begun. But while she wondered at the difference of the two young men, she did not find that the emptiness and conceit of the one put her at all out of charity with the modesty and worth of the other. Why they were different, Robert explained to her himself in the course of a quarter of an hour's conversation, for talking of his brother and lamenting the extreme gaucherie which he really believed kept him from mixing in proper society, he candidly and generously attributed much less to any natural deficiency than to the misfortune of a private education. While he himself, though probably without any material superiority by nature, merely from the advantage of a public school, was as well fitted to mix in the world as any other man. Upon my soul, he added, I believe it is nothing more, and so often I tell my mother when she is grieving about it, my dear madam, I always say to her, you must make yourself easy, the evil is now irremediable. And it has been entirely your own doing. Why would you be persuaded by my uncle, Sir Robert, against your own judgment, to place Edward under private tuition at the most critical time of his life? If you had only sent him to Westminster as well as myself, instead of sending him to Mr. Pratt's, all this would have been prevented. This is my way in which I always consider the matter, and my mother is perfectly convinced of her error. Eleanor would not oppose his opinion, because whatever might be her general estimation of the advantage of a public school, she could not think of Edward's abode in Mr. Pratt's family with any satisfaction. "You reside in Devonshire, I think," was his next observation, "in a cottage near Dawlish." Elinor set him right as to its situation, and it seemed rather surprising to him that anybody could live in Devonshire without living near Dawlish. He bestowed his hearty approbation, however, on their species of house. "For my own part," said he, "I am excessively fond of a cottage. There's always so much comfort, so much elegance about them, and I protest, if I had any money to spare, I should buy a little land and build myself one within a short distance of London, where I might drive myself down at any time, and collect a few friends about me and be happy. I advise everybody who is going to build a cottage. My friend Lord Courtland came to me the other day on purpose to ask my advice, and laid before me 3 different plans of Bonhomie's." A Bonhomie. Bonhomie, a well-known architect. Bonhomie, a well-known architect. "I was to decide on the best of them. 'My dear Courtland,' said I, immediately throwing them all into the fire, 'do not adopt either of them, but by all means build a cottage. And that, I fancy, will be the end of it.' Some people imagine that there can be no accommodations, no space in a cottage, but this is all a mistake. I was last month at my friend Elliot's near Dartford. Lady Elliot wished to give a dance. 'But how can it be done?' said she. 'My dear Faraz, do tell me how it is to be managed. There is not room in this cottage that will hold a 10 couple, and where can the supper be?' I immediately saw that there could be no difficulty in it. So I said, 'My dear Lady Elliot, do not be uneasy. The dining parlour will admit 18 couple with ease. Card tables to be placed in the drawing room. The library may be open for tea and other refreshments, and let the supper be set out in the saloon.' Lady Elliot was delighted with the thought. We measured the dining room and found it would hold exactly 18 couple, and the affair was arranged precisely after my plan. So that, in fact, you see, if people do not know how to set about every comfort, if people do but know how to set it about, every comfort may be as well enjoyed in a cottage as in the most spacious dwelling." Elinor agreed to it all, for she did not think he deserved a compliment of rational opposition. Elinor agreed to it all, for she did not think he deserved the compliment of rational opposition. Period. She said, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Yeah. As John Dashwood had no more pleasure in music than his elder sister, his mind was equally at liberty to fix on anything else, and a thought struck him during the evening which he communicated to his wife for her approbation when they got home. The consideration of Mrs. Dennison's mistake in supposing his sister their guests had suggested the propriety of their being really invited to become such, while Mrs. Jennings' engagements kept her from home. The expense would be nothing, the inconvenience not more, and it was altogether an attention which the delicacy of his conscience pointed out to be requisite to its complete enfranchisement from his promise to his father. Fanny was startled at the proposal. "I do not see how it can be done," said she, without affronting Lady Middleton, for they spend every day with her. "Otherwise I should be exceedingly glad to do it. You know I am always ready to pay them any attention in my power, as my taking them out this evening shows. But they are Lady Middleton's visitors. How can I ask them away from her?" Her husband, but with great humility, did not see the force of her objection. They had already spent a week in this manner in Conduit Street, and Lady Middleton could not be displeased at their giving the same number of days to such near relations. Fanny paused a moment, and then with fresh vigour said, "My love, I would ask them with all my heart if it was in my power, but I had just settled within myself to ask Miss Steeles to spend a few days with us. They are very well behaved, good kind of girls, and I think the attention is due to them, as their uncle did so very well by Edward. We can ask your sisters some other year, you know, but the Miss Steeles may not be in town any more. I am sure you will like them. Indeed, you do like them, you know, very much already, and so does my mother, and they are such favourites with Harry." Mr. Dashwood was convinced. He saw the necessity of inviting the Miss Steeles immediately, and his conscience was pacified by the resolution of inviting his sisters another year. Fanny is the worst. Fanny, Fanny, Bobanny, Banana Fana for Fanny. Me, my, mo, manny, Fanny. This brother has this much good intention for his sisters, and it's just blown out of the water by Fanny's awfulness towards them. At the same time, however, slyly suspecting that another year would make the invitation needless by bringing Elinor to town as Colonel Brandon's wife and Marianne as their visitor. Fanny, rejoicing in her escape, and proud of the ready wit that had procured it, wrote the next morning to Lucy to request a company and assistance for some days in Harley Street as soon as Lady Middleton could spare them. This was enough to make Lucy really and reasonably happy. Mrs. Dashwood seemed actually working for her herself, cherishing all her hopes, and promoting all her views. Such an opportunity of being with Edward and his family was, above all things, the most material to her interest, and such an invitation the most gratifying to her feelings. It was an advantage that could not be too gratefully acknowledged, nor speedily made of use of. And the visits to Lady Middleton, which had not before had any precise limits, was instantly discovered to have been always meant to end in 2 days' time. When the note was shown to Elinor, as it was within 10 minutes after its arrival, it gave her for the first time some share in the expectations of Lucy, for such a mark of uncommon kindness, vouchsafed on so short an acquaintance, seemed to declare that the goodwill towards her arose from something more than merely malice against herself, and might be brought by time and address to do everything that Lucy wished. Her flattery had already subdued the pride of Lady Middleton, and made an entry into the close heart of Mrs. John Dashwood, and these were effects that laid open the probability of greater. The Miss Steeles removed to Harley Street, and all that reached Elinor of their influence there strengthened her expectation of the event. Sir John, who called on them more than once, brought home such accounts of the favour they were in, as must be universally striking. Mrs. Dashwood had never been so much pleased with any young woman in her life as she was with them, had given each of them a needlebook made by some emigrant, called Lucy by her Christian name, and did not know whether she should ever be able to part with them. Wow. On to Volume 3. Wow. What an interesting turn of events. The Steeles are going to go spend some time with the Mr. and Mrs. Dashwood, and this is all very fascinating. That was a great line. I think they talked about that line even in that video that I saw with John Mullen. That's very funny. I'm not going to even dignify that with a response, Eleanor said. She just agreed to everything. Wow. Volume 3. Next time on me reading out loud in front of YouTube in this video, Sensibility. Happy reading, everybody. Take care of yourselves, and ta-ta.